Miles Carter, a 52-year-old retired Army general, was cruising down the highway in his well-maintained SUV, but today felt particularly special. The sun rose like a golden beacon on the horizon, illuminating the fractured terrain of the landscape. The winding road unfurled ahead of him, bordered by fields that shimmered in the gentle morning light. The serenity of the moment wrapped around him like a warm quilt, comforting but invigorating. In the back seat of the SUV, honed from years of military discipline, was a heavy steel safe, securely strapped in place. To the untrained eye, it simply looked like an ordinary safe, but to Miles, it was a treasure trove, a collection of his life's worth. It held personal documents, military awards that marked his distinguished career, and cherished family heirlooms that embodied memories he treasured deeply. Perhaps the most striking feature of this safe was the unique security system he had optimized himself. If someone dared to tamper with it, it would release a burst of industrial-grade indelible paint, leaving no chance for a would-be burglar to escape undetected. As Miles drove further down the highway, he let his mind wander back to his years in the service. Each trip had its lessons, its tribulations, the camaraderie forged amidst chaos, and the sacrifices made along the way. Those memories were bittersweet but defined him. Today was meant to be a day of reflection, a pause in the fast-paced world outside his quiet life. Little did he know that tranquility would soon give way to chaos. Suddenly, bright red and blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror, their harsh glow cutting through the morning calm. The sound of a siren sliced through the atmosphere like a sharpened blade, jarring him from his thoughts. "No way," he murmured, squinting at the speedometer, checking for a sign of wrongdoing. As far as he could tell, he was obeying all traffic laws, and his vehicle was in impeccable condition. With a resigned sigh, he pulled over to the side of the road, the tires crunching on the gravel. Moments later, the door of the patrol car swung open, and out stepped Sergeant Rick Davidson, a stocky figure with an unyielding scowl, a presence that screamed authority. Davidson approached the vehicle, his demeanor exuding an air of self-importance, his hand resting firmly on the side of his holster. "Morning, sir," Davidson called. His voice edged with skepticism as he stepped closer. His eyes zeroed in on the bulky safe in the back seat, suspicion sparking an instant tension in the air. "That's an interesting piece of cargo you've got there. Mind telling me what's inside?" Miles rolled down the window just enough to engage in conversation, his posture relaxed yet alert. "Good morning, officer. It contains personal items. Nothing illegal." Davidson raised an eyebrow, his skepticism deepening. "Personal items in a safe on the back seat? You don't think that's a little unusual?" "Unusual doesn't equate to illegal," Miles replied evenly, maintaining his composure. Years of military training had taught him how to defuse situations with quiet authority, and he drew on that as he faced the inquiry. "Funny. Usually, people don't haul safe around unless they are hiding something," Davidson huffed, his smirk returning as if he had won a mental game. "How about you open it up for me just to make sure there's nothing dangerous in there?" Miles met Davidson's gaze unflinchingly, sensing the rising tension in the atmosphere. "I'm sorry, officer, but I'm not opening anything. There's no probable cause for you to search my property." Davidson's expression soured, his confidence unraveling as he leaned slightly closer to Miles. "Now listen here," he said slowly, drawing out each word. "You may have a clean record, but I've seen more than my fair share of strange things out on this highway. And let me tell you, a safe in the back seat? That screams suspicion." Miles clenched his jaw, frustration rising. "Listen, Sergeant, I'm not trying to provoke you. I'm simply asking you to follow the law. If you think you have grounds for a search, articulate them. Otherwise, I'd like to be on my way." Davidson's smile disappeared, replaced by something darker. He straightened up, crossing his arms as he found the hubris to keep pushing further, like a predator closing in on helpless prey. "I think you're just digging yourself deeper. If you're going to make this difficult, I'll just handle it myself." With that, Davidson stomped back to his patrol car, an overinflated sense of authority guiding his actions. Miles watched him warily, his heart rate quickening. He was preparing for trouble, but he refused to back down. Seconds later, Davidson returned, wielding a crowbar like a weapon, an expression of excitement on his face as if he had just found the ultimate prize. Let's see what you're hiding, huh? No, Miles stepped out of his vehicle, his voice firm as he placed himself between Davidson and the safe. Don't touch it. That's my property. Davidson didn't flinch, his confidence only growing. Oh, I think I do. If you're invoking your rights, I'll just do this the hard way. He shoved the crowbar under the edge of the safe door, exerting pressure as if that would magically give him the access he craved. Panic surged within Miles. He couldn't let that happen. Back away, Sergeant. You have no idea what you're messing with, he warned, hope dwindling that he could make Davidson understand the enormity of his actions. That was when the situation escalated to a point neither of them anticipated. A faint hiss filled the air, followed by a loud pop. A geyser of bright green paint erupted from the safe, shooting like a monster from a Chinese dragon tail, hitting Davidson square in the face. His expression shifted swiftly from shock to rage. What the? He roared, stumbling backward and waving his arms in a futile attempt to wipe the vibrant ink off. Instead, it smeared across his face, turning him into a canvas of chaotic color. Miles couldn't help but smile, the tension dissipating as he viewed the absurdity of the scene before him. There's your lesson in respecting personal property, he said coolly. Davidson flailed for a moment as the paint dripped from his eyelids. You've got to be kidding me. This is ridiculous, he yelled, still trying to find something to wipe the paint away, but it just made him look like a brightly colored alien brandishing a crowbar. Not my fault you decided to play pirate with land that isn't yours, Miles said, crossing his arms, savoring the poetic justice unfolding before him. Then came the crowing laughter from nearby cyclists who had been passing by the scene. Some pulled out their phones, documenting the unfolding drama, while others exchanged incredulous looks as they tried to process the surreal sight. Davidson, once an imposing figure, was now a spectacle, bright green and humiliated. What have I done? Davidson cried out, more to the universe than to Miles in that moment of disbelief, splatters of paint dripping down from his hands, his uniform now resembling a walking modern art piece. Oh, I think everyone knows what you've done, Sergeant, Miles replied, his tone lingering on. Edge of mockery. You thought your badge gave you the right to bully a civilian without consequence. Now, how does it feel to reap what you sow? Davidson, still grappling with the chaos around him, began to step back towards his patrol car, trying to salvage some dignity. This isn't over, he warned, but the simmering anger of embarrassment replaced the believable threat once held in his voice. Oh, but it is, Sergeant, Miles quipped, watching as Davidson, now half covered in luminescent paint, retreated with awkwardness akin to a child caught in a mischief. There's a camera, and your days of intimidation might just be coming to an end, wouldn't you agree? With all the weight of shepherding the military code and the strength of his experience behind the words, Miles knew the implications of the moment went far beyond just a brawl with a rogue officer. The yoke of authority laid heavy on the shoulders of those sworn to protect, and that authority hadn't just been undermined, it had been punctured by paint. For Sergeant Davidson, this marked a pivotal change in the trajectory of his career, one that would haunt him for months to come. Word spread like wildfire. Within moments, the incident found its way to social media. Clips of Davidson stumbling back, the paint shooting from the safe, and the enthusiastic laughter of spectators blew up online. Memes erupted with unapologetic glee, mocking the overzealous officer who had met the unwelcome end of a defensive paint barrage. A day later, Miles reclined in his home, sipping his coffee as memes and videos showcasing Davidson's colorful mishap continued to swirl across the internet. The spectacle brought about a bubbling conversation, a ripping thread through the community about the limits of authority and the need for reform. As the day wore on, Miles found himself inundated with calls. Journalists sought comment, friends called to share their astonishment, and community members wanted to thank him for standing up to Davidson's bullying tactics. He didn't relish the attention, but something in him shifted. That night, he decided to speak with a local news outlet, articulating his thoughts on the importance of accountability in law enforcement. This isn't just about one officer, he said on camera, exuding an air of calm authority. It's about the way the community interacts with those meant to protect it. We need to have clear conversations about respect, boundaries, and the true essence of service. Meanwhile, within the close quarters of the police department, Davidson sat at his desolate desk, the weight of his decision pressing down like a heavy quilt. He surveyed the viral aftermath of what had unraveled and braced himself for the inevitable confrontation with his captain. The captain's office door swung open, and in he stormed, radiating anger like a thunderstorm. "What were you thinking?" his captain barked, voice severe and electric. "Do you realize the implications here? You've become a laughingstock, and worse, you've lost the trust of the very community you're supposed to serve. This is an embarrassment for the entire department." Davidson, still recovering from the initial shock of the incident, struggled to find the right words. I didn't know it was him, Captain," he stammered, attempting to justify his actions, though he knew it was a weak defense. The disbelief washed over him in waves. He had been so blinded by pride that he couldn't see the man before him. "Does that even matter? You pulled a crowbar on a civilian and forced an interaction that never should have escalated. Now look at the fallout," the captain exclaimed, flipping through the various media clips on his desk, each one driving home the gravity of Davidson's actions. "People are mocking you, and rightfully so. This isn't just a blunder. It's a humiliation, a stain on our reputation." Davidson's face flushed with embarrassment that couldn't be hidden under the layers of paint still marked as evidence of his poor choices. "I didn't mean for things to escalate like that. I just thought." "Clearly, you thought wrong," the captain interrupted, voice lowering as he straightened in his chair. "Now we're looking at a PR nightmare while Miles Carter is feeding into the frenzy. You need to make amends before this spirals out of control further." Davidson hung his head, the imposing figure he'd once portrayed now crumbling under the weight of his own insecurities. He realized the foolishness of his need to assert power over someone he should have respected. "I'll do whatever it takes to resolve this," he finally managed, desperation lacing his tone. "Let me make it right." Later that week, with pressure mounting, Davidson crafted an apology letter, not just to Miles but to the community he had failed to safeguard. It was filled with attempts to acknowledge the violation of personal space, the errors of his assumptions, and a promise to learn from the experience. Meanwhile, Miles continued to engage with the community, his voice gaining traction as a thought leader on discussions surrounding law enforcement and police accountability. As he and others rallied for change, Davidson's reputation crumbled further, overshadowed by the previous glory of his uniform. As days turned into weeks, the incident regressed into its own historical footnote, a bizarre clash of fate that had transformed the local conversation. On the eve of a community meeting discussing law enforcement practices and community relations, Miles found himself standing in front of an audience. Mayors, community leaders, officers, and townsfolk huddled in anticipation. With a deep breath, he stepped up to the podium, his heart steady and grounded. "Today, we step into a new chapter," he began, met with rapt attention. "We must create an environment where respect reigns supreme. This isn't about glorifying power but rather about serving the community we're all a part of." Davidson sat at the back of the room, the shame of his previous actions haunting his every move. He listened intently, wishing to blend into the shadows, but acknowledging that he needed to confront his past. As Miles continued, he ventured into personal anecdotes of his time in the service, highlighting the core values of honor, duty, and respect, the underpinnings of an effective military and law enforcement service. He emphasized the importance of reflection, learning from mistakes, and holding each other accountable. "This community deserves better, and the officers sworn to protect must rise to that standard, just as much as the civilians must advocate for their rights," Miles stated, punctuating his thoughts with a steady gaze that crisscrossed through the crowd. At the end of the meeting, the applause echoed, overwhelming in its magnitude. As people began to file out, they offered words of encouragement and affirmation. Some even turned to Davidson, who stood frozen at his chair, avenues of accountability flooding back towards him like a tide. "That was inspiring," one officer remarked, his tone genuine. "We need more leaders like him." Davidson swallowed hard, feeling the stirrings of regret. He approached Miles, his steps hesitant. "Sir, can I speak to you for a moment?" Miles turned, meeting Davidson's gaze with a mix of wariness and resolve. "What do you want to say, Sergeant?" Davidson inhaled deeply, nostalgia mixed with guilt surfacing from within. "I wanted to apologize, in every sense of the word. My behavior was unacceptable, and I betrayed what this badge means." I've learned the hard way that authority is not a tool to intimidate but a responsibility to uphold. Thank you for standing your ground. Miles studied Davidson's expression carefully, searching for any semblance of insincerity but finding none. He considered the officer before him, once a figure of authority, now a humbled man holding on to a lesson that would reshape his approach moving forward. Thank you, Sergeant, Miles said finally. We all make choices that we regret, and they can be our greatest teachers. I'm glad you see that now. Davidson nodded, the exchange layering the importance of mutual respect among those tasked with upholding the law. It was a step, not a grand one, but a shift in the tide. As the weeks passed, the discourse within the community continued to evolve, ignited by Miles's powerful narrative and the unfortunate incident that led to profound reflection. Davidson's journey had only begun. He now grasped the enormity of his actions, seeking ways to restructure the dynamics of law enforcement in the small town. Accountability must be reciprocal, Miles would often say in discussions. We are all responsible for each other, bridging gaps where division seeks to divide. With each passing day, Davidson increasingly understood what it meant to serve the community, retracting a world of arrogance he once associated with authority. Miles's determination to pave the way for meaningful dialogue centered around respect and mutual understanding impacted not just his life but those around him. And as autumn settled into the community, a stark reminder of the change they had gone through emerged with each falling leaf, a narrative shaped not just by conflict but a shared future inspired by collective growth. In the end, they learned to navigate the delicate threads of authority and respect together, nurturing a bond that renewed hope in what it meant to protect and serve. The weeks following the community meeting were filled with revelations and transformations for both Miles Carter and Sergeant Rick Davidson. The fallout from the paint incident and the open discussions surrounding law enforcement sparked a movement within the community. Conversations began to shift, focusing not only on accountability for officers but on building trust and open lines of communication between law enforcement and the public. Miles found himself unexpectedly woven into this fabric of change. He was approached by local advocacy groups, invited to speak at various events, and even enlisted as a consultant regarding community policing efforts. The narrative that had initially put him in an uncomfortable spotlight had transformed into something meaningful, a catalyst for progress. One afternoon, while reviewing notes for an upcoming panel discussion, Miles received a text from Janet, his daughter, a passionate organizer who was also actively involved in humanitarian initiatives. Dad, there's a community event this weekend at the park. Would love for you to come. A lot of people want to hear your thoughts on policing and community relations. The invitation warmed him, reminding him of the connection he shared with Janet that transcended their differing generations. He replied confirming his attendance, then sat back, a mix of pride and apprehension washing over him. Speaking about difficult issues wasn't new to him, but expressing personal experiences and humanity amid current events demanded a vulnerability he hadn't anticipated. Yet, with each event he attended, he felt increasingly empowered to share his story. Meanwhile, Sergeant Davidson had his own path to navigate. Emboldened by his encounter with Miles, he reached out to the community, focusing on rebuilding his image while promoting more empathetic community relations. He took part in discussions led by community leaders, learned about the residents' concerns, and began forming initiatives that extended beyond mere enforcement of the law. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow across the town, Davidson paced his living room, excitement merging with nervousness about an upcoming event. Community conversations. Building Trust was billed as an open forum where residents could speak directly with officers about their experiences and concerns. It was a chance to restore faith, something he deeply longed for after everything that had happened. He spent hours drafting a speech, his heart racing at the thought of presenting his journey and lessons learned through recent events. He wished to walk the line of vulnerability and authority, sharing his mistakes alongside his commitment to improving as a public servant. The time had come for Davidson to be more than a badge. He wanted to be a reflection of the community he served. The day of the event arrived, and a palpable excitement filled the air. Neighborhood families, community advocates, and fellow officers filled the town hall. There was a sense of hope, the kind that lingers just before dawn breaks, reminding everyone that change is possible despite the shadows of the past. Miles arrived early, scanning the room. He spotted familiar faces, friends, neighbors, and, of course, the ever-enthusiastic Janet bubbling with anticipation. He felt the collective energy of the crowd swirling around him, urging him to step into his role with confidence. As people filtered in, the room grew crowded, with chatter rising and voices intertwining. Miles took a moment to breathe, grounding himself. He could see a few officers present, Davidson among them, who looked remarkably at ease despite the heaviness of the situation ahead. The event commenced with introductions from community leaders and a light overview of the evening's agenda. Miles was introduced first, feeling the weight of expectation upon him as he stepped up to the microphone. As he looked out over the faces, he felt a strange mix of nerves and determination. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice steady as he addressed the audience. "It's important we're all gathered here tonight to discuss what we are: community members, families, law enforcement. We're bound by a shared responsibility to uphold the values that bring us together." He shared anecdotes of his experience in the military, emphasizing the core principles of honor, courage, and respect. These values extend beyond combat and into our civilian lives. They can guide us, police officers, civilians, parents, and children alike, through the complexities we face as a society. Applause erupted at the realization that this was not just rhetoric. This was a call to action, a shared understanding of hallowed principles they all held dear. Miles spoke for 10 minutes but could have continued for hours, caught up in the palpable need for connection, hope, and constructive dialogue. By the time he finished, he felt invigorated, infused by the warmth of the crowd and the sense of solidarity that filled the room. Next, it was Davidson's turn. Rising from his chair, he felt the weight of the moment. Pressing on his shoulders. As he approached the podium, the air thickened with anticipation, the residual whispers ebbing away as everyone leaned in to hear. "Hello, everyone. My name is Rick Davidson," he began, nervously adjusting the microphone. He could feel the weight of judgment on him but stayed committed to his purpose. "I stand before you not just as an officer but as a man who made mistakes. I've had to confront my choices profoundly, especially in light of my encounter with Miles Carter." The audience's silence was deafening, ears perked up as he continued. "That incident opened my eyes to the importance of respect and the balance of power. I allowed pride and some ingrained biases to override my judgment. I mistakenly assumed that my authority gave me license to act however I wished. I was wrong." Davidson allowed himself to be vulnerable, sharing stories of his own background. Growing up in a family that valued the badge above all else, but also highlighting how that upbringing resulted in a lack of understanding of the struggles the community faced. He shared details from behind the scenes, the trials of being an officer, but also the joy derived from meaningful interactions with residents. "As officers, we have a duty to protect, and that includes listening," he asserted, determination shining through his words. "I've realized that transparency and mutual respect are essential in fostering that relationship. I'm committed to fostering a more empathetic approach, one in which trust lives at the center." At that moment, a sense of triumph and hope swept through the hall, and Davidson could sense it. Not only was he beginning to make amends, but he could feel the audience's approval arise from a collective understanding that they were finally starting to bridge the gap. Questions arose after the speeches, giving the community a voice to articulate their concerns. The discussions flowed with insights about improving response to calls, handling community disputes, and the crucial need for continual training in sensitivity for officers, without veering into accusatory or hostile territory. As the evening progressed, a palpable change hung in the air. The conversations brought forth newly unified voices, stimulating thoughts and planting seeds for future engagements. Miles felt a wave of pride as he watched Davidson navigate the conversations with care, asking questions genuinely and seeking to understand rather than defend. Hours melted away, and before long, as the crowd began to disperse, Miles stepped aside to have a quiet word with Davidson, a sense of kinship blossoming between them. "Rick," Miles said, placing a hand on the officer's shoulder, "what you did tonight took guts. It won't erase what happened before, but it's a step toward healing." Davidson nodded, relief flooding through him. "Thank you, Miles. This journey isn't easy, but I'm grateful for your understanding." It feels like we're finally on the right path. I hope we keep this momentum going, Miles echoed, his voice firm with conviction. But remember, it's not just about one event. We need ongoing dialogue. This is the beginning of a greater change for all of us. Absolutely, Davidson agreed, a fire of determination igniting in his eyes. I've learned how important it is to maintain relationships between officers and the community. I want to keep working together, not just as colleagues but as partners in ensuring our home is safe and welcoming for everyone. The two men shared a sincere handshake, a bond forged not in the fires of conflict but in the crucible of growth. They stood united, two individuals from vastly different worlds, now aligning their intentions toward a brighter future for their community. As the sun dipped further on the horizon, casting long shadows across the ground, Miles and Davidson knew they could navigate the complexities ahead. An evening that began with apprehension had transformed into a celebration of collaboration. A reminder that even in the darkest times, there lay a pathway towards healing, understanding, and growth. With renewed hope echoing through their thoughts, they stepped back into the world outside, fully aware that they were just at the beginning of the change their community needed. The healing would not happen overnight, but it had been ignited. It would expand and evolve just as they would, one conversation at a time. The days following the town hall meeting were a whirlwind of activity. Miles' message continued to resonate with the community, and he found himself at the center of a growing movement. He was invited to speak at schools, churches, and community centers, spreading the message of hope and unity. Janet, too, became an integral part of this momentum, using her platform to amplify the voices of marginalized communities and facilitate dialogue between law enforcement and civilians. Meanwhile, Rick Davidson's efforts to rebuild trust were paying off. He worked closely with Miles to develop a community policing program, focused on de-escalation techniques, community outreach, and education. The program, dubbed Trust Bridge, gained traction across the state, and soon, police departments from nearby towns were seeking to replicate its success. The partnership between Miles and Rick blossomed, transcending their initial encounter. They became each other's sounding board, offering guidance and support as they navigated the complexities of their new roles. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, a testament to the power of forgiveness and the importance of human connections. One morning, as Miles walked into a community center to meet with a group of activists, he noticed a poster on the wall that caught his eye. Community Unity Day, a celebration of diversity and inclusion. The flyer featured a collage of faces, each representing a different aspect of the community. A police officer, a business owner, a student, and a faith leader, among others. In the center of the poster, a simple statement stood out: "Together, we rise." Miles couldn't help but smile as he felt a sense of pride knowing that the spirit of unity he and Rick were fostering was beginning to resonate throughout the community. He took out his phone to share the poster on social media, adding a caption: "The future is bright when we come together." As the days turned into weeks, the seeds of change Miles and Rick had sown began to bear fruit. Local businesses started to invest in community programs, focusing on education, job training, and mentorship. The school district introduced diversity and inclusion curricula, teaching empathy and understanding to students from a young age. The impact of Trust Bridge also began to show. Police officers were reporting fewer confrontations with the public, thanks to the training and mentorship provided by Rick and Miles. Community members, in turn, were sharing their experiences and concerns with officers, leading to a deeper understanding and trust. Janet, with her passion for social justice, continued to play a crucial role in the movement. She organized rallies, town halls, and community events, ensuring that everyone's voice was heard. Her energy and conviction inspired others to join the cause, creating a wave of momentum that would not be easily derailed. One evening, as Miles sat on his porch, watching the sunset with Janet by his side, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. The transformation he and Rick had set in motion was not only altering the community but also changing him. He thought back to the pain and anger he had felt after that fateful night, and how it had given way to forgiveness and hope. "You know, kiddo," Miles said, turning to Janet, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm proud to be a part of this community." Janet smiled, her eyes sparkling with agreement. I know exactly what you mean, Dad. We're not just making a difference. We're creating a new narrative. One of hope, understanding, and unity. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Miles leaned over and hugged his daughter tightly. I couldn't have done this without you, kiddo. You're the spark that ignited the flame of change. The night air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers and the distant sound of children laughing. It was a reminder that the journey was far from over, but the progress made so far was undeniable. Miles, Rick, Janet, and the entire community were on a journey toward healing, growth, and a brighter future, one step at a time. The night drew to a close, but the seeds of change had been sown. As the community slept, they were nourished by the promise of a new dawn, filled with hope and the knowledge that together, they could create a world where everyone felt seen, heard, and valued. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity, as Miles, Rick, Janet, and the entire community worked tirelessly to build on the progress made. Trust Bridge continued to grow, with officers and community members working together to identify and address issues before they escalated. Miles and Rick's partnership became a hallmark of the program, as they traveled the state sharing their story and offering guidance to departments looking to replicate Trust Bridge's success. They faced setbacks and challenges along the way, but their commitment to each other and the community kept them moving forward. Janet, meanwhile, continued to be a driving force behind the movement. She organized rallies, town halls, and community events, using her platform to amplify the voices of marginalized communities and bring attention to the issues that mattered most. As the years went by, the community began to transform in ways that no one could have imagined. Crime rates began to drop, as officers worked together with community members to address the root causes of problems, rather than just reacting to symptoms. Businesses began to flourish, as entrepreneurs saw the economic potential of investing in the community. New schools were built, and the existing ones were renovated, ensuring that every child had access to quality education. The community came together to plan and execute large-scale projects, from renovating public spaces to organizing cultural festivals. The sense of unity and purpose that had once been lacking began to take hold, as people from all walks of life worked together towards a common goal. One day, as Miles walked through the newly renovated downtown area, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The streets were bustling with people of all ages, cultures, and backgrounds. The sound of laughter and music filled the air, and the smell of fresh coffee and baked goods wafted from the cafes. Rick and Janet were by his side, smiling from ear to ear as they took in the sights and sounds. They had come a long way, and they knew that the journey was far from over. But for the first time in years, they felt a sense of peace, knowing that the community was finally on the road to healing. As they walked, they stumbled upon a group of children gathered around a large mural, painted by local artists. The image depicted a community united, with people of all ages and backgrounds standing together, hands raised in a gesture of solidarity. Miles, Rick, and Janet stopped in front of the mural, taking in its beauty. They looked at each other, knowing that this was more than just a work of art. It was a symbol of the community's journey towards unity and healing. "We did it," Janet said, her voice trembling with emotion. "We're not done yet," Rick replied, smiling. "But we're on the right path," Miles added, his voice filled with gratitude. As they stood there, surrounded by the vibrant colors and sounds of the community, they knew that they had created something truly special. Something that would continue to grow and evolve long after they were gone. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but they were ready to face whatever challenges came their way. For they knew that as long as they had each other, and the community stood together, anything was possible. The four of them stood there, a symbol of hope and unity, as the community celebrated its new beginning.